So in this video, I'm going to talk about the process and cost of me buying a Morton building that I'm currently in right now. So I built this building, or had this building built 3 years ago. It is a 48 by 80 foot building with 16-foot sidewalls. And the inspiration, or the requirement as I put it, for buying this building is the vehicles behind me. So I own 2 classic buses. So I needed those to be inside after years of sitting out in the elements. So I'm going to kind of go over the steps that I experienced. So, when I was looking to buy a building, obviously I'm trying to find out the price of what do these things cost. And also, how do you do it? Like, what is the steps that it takes from, your initial conception to actually having something? And this is my first and probably only foray into that process. So I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit of that, because if I had found a video like this before I started, it would have really helped kind of explain what to expect or things to kind of prepare for. So that's the reason why I'm doing this. And also at the end, I'll share what it cost me to have this building built. A little asterisk there, because obviously, there will be some variables in play, but I'll share with what it cost me. So first thing is the first step, and that is honestly just looking at the Morton website and seeing what they offer. They do everything from kind of large garages like this to actual houses, smaller sheds, everything in between. This building is obviously on the upper end of what someone gets when it comes to square footage. They told me it's in the top 10% of what our local Morton dealer kind of deals with, but anyway, they tend to do everything along the way. So take a look at that. The nice thing about that step is that it's free, and not many steps in this process are, so enjoy that one while it lasts, if you will. The second thing that I would look into is really what are your local requirements or limitations, specifically how big can you build and what process do you need to go through with your local city or whatever your local government is. And so my property is zoned rural residential, so that has fairly lax restrictions on what you can build. It was a percentage of the total acreage, and so we have a little over 2 acres, so it was quite a bit of building that was allowed. So check the zoning. And I even drove down there and I said, specifically, give me the square foot limitation of what I can have. I wanted that in writing, which I would also recommend. So if there should be any questions down the line, you knew that. And also check the rules of where the building can be placed. You most likely will have a limitation of how close to your property line can you go, or how close or far away from the building can it be. So ask those questions early so there's no surprises later. And then what we did to kind of visualize the building is that we took kind of like those driveway markers when we live in a snowy area that you put along your driveway to help mark those. And we used that to kind of lay out the actual building dimensions, so we had a sense of where it fell on the property, as well as get a sense of where it needs to sit in order to accommodate, again, distance from property lines or anything like that. So that really helped us kind of visualize that portion or part of the process. So once you kind of have a sense of what you kind of want or how big you want to go, obviously then contact Morton. And I just did that through the website, and all of my initial communications were via email, which was kind of nice. I think we're at a point with our communications that honestly a text message and an email is a lot less intrusive than dealing with phone calls. So our local Morton people were pretty good about just communicating through that. So I contacted them, and they put me in touch with the salesperson, salesman that was going to handle our inquiry. I'm sure they get quite a few of these. And so I dealt with him on a one-to-one basis via email, and I said, this is what I'm looking for in size. And then obviously this was a changing project. Hey, how about this wide, this long? And he stepped us through all the processes on his end, and he was very accommodating and continually sending us rough estimates of what a building of that size or doors of that size and all that stuff. So that was kind of the first real foray into getting something down on paper and dealing with them. And I have my notes here, so pardon with me. I just want to make sure I miss anything. And so, yeah, so they gave a basic estimate, and then there was always this caveat saying that until they view the property, they're not going to be able to come up with some real hard numbers. So obviously that's understandable. So everything was very tentative at that point, but it gave a great sense of what a building would cost. And there are a million variables. Obviously it can get wider, it can get longer, it can get taller. You can add accessories to it with doors and windows and all that stuff. And they offered a lot more services than just the building and the doors. There was conversations about having electrical work done and some plumbing work and all that. But to be honest, that work isn't being done by Morton. They would then contract through another contractor to bring those services in. And so there was a lot of uncertainty from them regarding specific questions that I was asking, like what type of lighting. Like specifically, I wanted some real specifics of what they're looking at, and they did know, because that isn't something that they're selling me. They'll work with someone else to bring those things in. So it kind of muddied the water with some of those details, so I opted, you know what, let's get the building up, and then I can do that work, or work with an electrician or a plumber after the fact and have those things put in. So to streamline the process, I kind of limited everything that wasn't going to be part of what Morton themselves were going to do. And then after this step, for me personally, I basically ghosted them for 4 months. The holidays were involved. This is kind of over late fall through the winter. Life kind of went a different direction, and then I just stopped communicating with them. And there was no pressure on their part. I wasn't getting phone calls or emails or text messages kind of pushing me into a possible sale. I'm venturing a guess they get a lot of people that get to that stage and then bow out because of the price or other complications that fall in. So to be honest, that was actually nice. I think we've all been in a part of a sale, whether you're buying a car or something, and you just step back for a little bit, and man, you just get peppered with inquiries about like, let's close this deal. What can we do to make it happen? And that didn't happen in this case, which was nice. So that goes into the next step, which was arrange for a site visit. So I reached back out to him and said, okay, I'm actually interested in proceeding with this. And so our salesman said, okay, well, let me come out to your property. Let's take a look at what you have, and we can start working on some more specific numbers for you. So we looked at the specific location on my property, and that kind of led into, for myself, that we were going to have concrete poured to extend our current driveway into this building. So that was part of the calculation that he took into to give a rough estimate there. Now, granted, the concrete price will not be final until the building is built. Obviously, that if you calculate that it's a 30-foot extension on your driveway and they built the building and it turns out it's 32 feet, there's a little bit of difference there that needs to be accounted for. So that final price didn't happen until the building was closed. And in our case, actually, it was actually less. So they had overestimated what we needed. And then the final price, and I can't remember what the difference was, but the final price was lower than the initial estimate that we got at this stage. So that part was kind of nice. And then he also inquired about zoning, just one more check on there, and to verify that, yes, in fact, we can build a building of this size on our property. And I can understand that they have some hesitancy. I can imagine that they've had experience where someone is absolutely sure that this can be done, and then they show up, or they go to get the permits for this, and the city or county or whatever flat out says, oh no, you can't build that there or that big. And so there were some inquiries at that point, and then I had some documentation to verify that yes, we could build it in this location and of this size. So after that was complete, it came to us to make the decision of whether we were going to make the purchase of the building that we had decided upon, and we decided to go forward with that. So we contacted our salesman and said, yes, let's do this. So the two options we were given was, the first one was just a 1% down payment, and that would lock in the material cost and then have us sign a contract for the building. The other option was a 30% down payment, and that got the permits and then put us on the schedule. And he forewarned us that as the year progresses, you get into the warmer months, more people are interested in building buildings, and the schedule can fill up fast. So this was being talked about in February, March, which was in the middle of winter for us in Northeast Ohio. And yeah, let's get on the schedule. So we put the 30% down, and that locked us in for the end of May, which was pretty early on. I mean, I think they'll build year round, but obviously most of their building projects are in the warmer months. So that put us right near the front of the line to get our building built. So we were happy to go that way. And then the next step of purchase, which doesn't happen yet, but just to kind of break it down, is 30% for the initial purchase, 60% when they deliver the materials, and then the last 10% come into play when the building is closing. You do your final walkthrough, and that 10% is variable. Like I said, for us, concrete was in play, so that 10% actually maybe was closer to 9% or 8%, whatever the number was. So because they did the final calculation of how much concrete that the company had dropped inside the building as well as outside. So that 10% will come at the very end. So with the signing of the contract, we locked in the colors of the building, both roof and the side, and they used a computer program. They came to our house and they had this program that they could do a virtual visualization of what the building would look like, door placement, window placement, all that stuff, and then we signed the contract at that time. So after that was done and we had given the 30%, the next step for us financially was getting a letter from the bank showing that we had the remainder of the funds. The letter, and I can't remember the specifics if it had a name, but the salesman kind of told us exactly what he needed, and I went to the bank and they seemed to understand. It wasn't a breakdown of what we had in our finances. It basically said, can you cover this amount? And I think that's really all it was. And then there was a letter that I got from the bank, and I sent that to Morton, and that kind of officially let the project go forward on it. And again, I'm imagining that they've had people say they had the funds and they get to the part of, they make all their orders and they go to deliver and it turns out the money isn't there. So I'm imagining that's something that they've implemented on their end to make sure that, yes, you can do that. Now, when it comes to finances as well, Morton doesn't do any financing as far as I've ever seen on that. So obviously the financing is to come through your own means, whatever. I'm not going to get into financing, but just be aware that Morton is going to need to know that you basically have the money on hand to complete this project. So after that, the next thing that fell to us was in anticipation of the work happening in the next 2 months is that we needed to have site work done, which is we were responsible for prepping our lawn to have this building built. So to be honest, not really being in the habit of getting someone to basically bring a bulldozer and level our lawn, it took a little bit of work, but eventually we found somebody, thankfully. Actually ended up being another Morton customer that had done a building not far from us, and turns out he had a bulldozer, done his own site work, and so he came to our house and did that. So that could take a little bit of lead work. I'd almost maybe recommend looking into that earlier if you're in a position where you don't know somebody, because you're going to need to have that done before the scheduled delivery date. And once that delivery date is set in concrete, you kind of know I have 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks that I need to have this site work done. And what they end up coming in and doing is leveling the land, staking out the corners of the building size and spreading gravel for, in our case, not just the building, but also the driveway that we were having installed to lead up to the driveway. So it took a little bit of legwork, and we ended up getting that done. We also did some prep work on our end of having some stumps removed that were kind of in the way of the eventual driveway, so we also had those included in that. But one thing you also want to mention when you talk to this person that's going to do the site work, let them know you're going to have them come back to do a little bit of touch-up after the building is up. So make sure they're aware of this, that if you know the build date, that within, let's say, a week of that, you're going to want them to come back and kind of touch up. What ends up happening, they end up building the building and all of this gravel ends up kind of getting pushed around. You're going to need them to come back in and smooth it back out in anticipation of having concrete work. Now, granted, this is assuming you're having concrete work doing. If you're just having a gravel floor or just dirt, this step isn't needed after the initial prep work. But if you are, make sure that you prep them and basically get them on the schedule to come back and do that little bit of work afterwards. So once we had the prep work done, or while we were working on the prep work, the next thing was getting some of the permits done. So I went to our city and I got the permits that were needed from the zoning and the building people. And what I did is I just filled out my information, name, address, whatever else they had on that, and then I just faxed that or emailed that to Morton, and they took care of everything else. There was a lot of questions about the engineering stuff on the building. They took care of that, and there wasn't any additional cost. Well, there is a cost because I'm paying for the building, but it was not outside of the cost of the building. So when these permits had to get purchased, Morton didn't come to me and say, okay, well, that is $150 or whatever. All of that stuff was included in the price that was quoted to us. So it was nice to have that completely taken care of on their end. And then the next step then was to have the materials delivered. So this was obviously scheduled in advance, so we knew it was coming. We had to have the site work done. They did a phone call just before to make sure, well, not just before, maybe a week before, to verify that in fact the site work had been done. And then they came to our house with 2 semis, and they skillfully backed it into our driveway. It's a very narrow road that they're coming off of, but they, one shot, brought both of the semis in and unloaded everything on property. They came in with their own lift, so we didn't have to have anything on site, or they didn't bring anything in separately. And then they unloaded everything and then kind of set it up as they needed for the eventual building of the actual structure in there. And that took maybe an hour, probably not even that. They were fairly quick about this. And then again, that's where that 60% second payment comes into the building, that the salesman came with the crew when they did their drop off, and we had to provide them with the second payment on the building at that time. Then became the building. So I had been planning for a building for a long time, over a decade. It finally happened and I was out of town. So I ended up missing all this happen. The wife was still home, so she got some pictures of the process, but it took 3 days. It was quick. I was probably gone for 4, and they squeezed the whole building in those 3 days. And again, this is minus concrete work and the large doors for us. The man door and the windows were all in, but the 2 garage doors weren't installed at the time. And then one other thing, right before they built, some of the things that are still variable, if you will, were the man door and the windows. That obviously doesn't really matter where those things go. And so when they dropped off the materials, they had the blueprints with them, and they said, are you sure you want those things here? And actually I ended up having a change of mind of where I wanted it, and they just penciled them right in. So that part was nice, that there was still some variable all the way up to the very end of where those things can go. And I'm very thankful that I made those changes for how we're kind of using the building on the inside. So the building was up, and then the concrete work followed a week after that. We didn't have to make any plans. They just said it's going to show up on this date, and they came in and did both the inside of the building as well as the driveway, and they were gone. I don't think we even had to even be here for that. And then the doors came about that same time. I can't remember actually if the doors were installed before or after the concrete, or may have actually been before. Same thing, the crew just showed up and installed the doors, and then that was that. And then came the final inspection. So once the concrete was good enough to use, so you wait, I can't remember, it was a week and a half, something like that. Our Morton salesman came back out, did a walkthrough with it. Obviously we're looking at doors and, any of the panel fittings, any of that stuff, any problems that we would have had, they would have taken care of it. And that was it. I gave him the last payment. He had, obviously talked to the concrete company, so he knew how many yards they had used, so he was able to adjust our final price. And I just, he called in advance, let me know, so when he showed up, I was able to give him a check for the last little bit left on the building. And that was actually it. So we had the building built, the doors installed. We didn't have any electrical work done yet, so while we had a very large door, didn't have any power to the garage door opener, so that we had scheduled that, and that fell soon after. We'd have power dragged out from the house. So at least we could open the door and all that stuff on while we were still using the building. So that was it. That is the overall process. There's a lot of steps along the way, or at least for me, it was a little bit of a learning curve getting through that, but it couldn't have been any easier, I think, looking back on it. The overall process was fairly painless. So it was good to kind of have the Morton salesman that we dealt with, who was very accommodating, kind of helped us through all of that stuff. So things to consider when building a building. Number one is zoning. Make sure you know what you can and can't do, just to avoid having heartbreak at some point where it needs to move or it needs to change in size and shape and all that stuff. So get very clear information. Obviously, with modern days where you can send emails, you kind of get it in writing. Contact your local zoning authority and get those hard numbers back from them so that you have something in print. And then when it comes to the pricing of this stuff, considerations, how close to Morton are you? Our house is probably about 100 miles away from their office/manufacturing location. If we were significantly closer, it probably would have impacted the price of our building in a noticeable amount, and vice versa. If we were further away, it would have been more. Also, to your proximity to gravel, just for the prep work that we had done on the inside and then the outside of the building, for where we live, there's probably a half dozen gravel pits within 10 to 20 miles of here. So the cost of having 2 dump trucks full of gravel come to our house was negligible. Not much more than just the cost of the material with that. So that would be something to consider as well. And then also the amount of site work needed is something to look at. Our property is relatively flat. We didn't have to have any dips filled in or anything like that. Basically, they just stripped off the topsoil. And also, too, we did not have the soil removed. We have enough land that we just had all of the dirt pushed out behind where the building would sit. So we didn't have to pay to have that dirt dragged out of here as well. So that also helped the cost of our building. Again, I mentioned this earlier, find someone to do the site work early. For us, we kind of scrambled, had a little bit harder time finding somebody to come in and bulldoze the land and get the gravel taken care of and do all of the staking out of the property lines or the building lines as well. And now that, again, this was built in 2018, so 2018, it's now 2021, and the one biggest thing that we saw start last year, really, and definitely carrying into 2021, is the cost of materials. Since we've purchased this building, steel has gone up 50% or more, and then obviously lumber going into 2021. Lumber, I think, has tripled in cost. It's 300% more than it cost, and this building is nothing more than sticks and metal. And I got to imagine that's going to play huge into the cost of these buildings. So hopefully this is a peak and this will diminish depending upon when you're watching this video. But the numbers that I give here shortly are going to reflect what we experienced. And actually, even when we were looking to buy or put down the money, there was an anticipated rising of steel costs. There was the talk of doing the tariffs of steel, specifically the China stuff. So that was another factor real quickly to kind of lock in those costs, because it was going to jump up 5-10%. And when you're dealing with a building that could cost tens of thousands of dollars, that's going to add up fairly quick in there. So things just to consider. So overall thoughts of the building, it was a very enjoyable process. I know I'm buying something, so I'd hope it's, enjoyable, because I'm giving away money on this stuff. But overall, the whole process was nice. Morton was very patient dealing with questions. I can't tell you how many emails I sent peppering them about, what if we change this small little thing? What if we move this? What if we change the overall size of the building and all that stuff? They were very nice about all of that, and we got a lot of updates, updated pricing, and new schematics of what the building would look like. So I never felt pressure during any part of this. It's a huge thing. You save up for a decade or more, perhaps, and you finally decide to spend the money on something, and you don't want someone hounding you to change what you want or even hound you to buy what you would like. You want to buy it on your timeline, and that's exactly what happened. So no regrets there. That was very nice. The fact that they took care of all the paperwork with the city, really once we kind of got the ball rolling on, when they bought the materials, it was really out of our hands. Once that timeline was set, it happened. So they did a lot of stuff behind the scenes and it was enjoyable. You're working your own life. You have your own things to do rather than deal with all those little details. While they offered more than just the building, again, the other contractor having electrical and plumbing work done, they never pressured us to do that. And to be honest, there's a couple things that I mentioned that I'd like to have done with the building, and our salesman was like, honestly, it's going to be cheaper if you go elsewhere. So that was kind of refreshing to have someone be honest about something like that. So I'm happy that we didn't really invest in those things early, and we've been able to take care of things at our pace afterwards. And then there's continued support after this. There were some concerns with some of the ceiling fans that we had that maybe they weren't working right, and so they happily came out. Again, they're 100 miles away. Without question, they said someone will be there tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and they went up there and looked at those. We had to have some of the panels on the outside replaced due to some damage, and it was taken care of quite quickly after the fact. So that was nice as well. I never felt that I was inconveniencing them, and they really seemed to go above and beyond to make sure that it was taken care of in a timely manner with that. So that part was nice. And one last thing before I get into the price is make sure you future-proof your building. So the vehicles behind me could easily be accommodated with a 12-foot main door coming in. But as we kind of talked about, even with the salesman, to future-proof this building, someone that may come in with a Class A vehicle or something, a very tall RV, these people build these things on, professional bus coaches. A 14-foot door, we opted for that, and actually that raised the requirement of doing a 16-foot sidewall to accommodate that. And I'm actually thankful that we had that discussion, and that's something that we pursued. So when we sell this house at some point, that it's going to open up the interest to a lot more people, especially if they can call up and say, can it accommodate this? And it can. The building of this size is rather unusual. Most people don't build them of this size. Most people aren't trying to accommodate 2 buses on the inside. So you want to make sure it's someone else that's in the same market. They're not going to show up and go, I can't believe you got all the square footage I need, but I can't fit my semi-trailer inside. And well, now they can, or at least we made sure that they can. So that was something to really consider when it comes to what you buy. Okay, so when it comes down to the price, I can see why it's very hard for Morton to tell you what a building costs. Material costs are constantly changing. The size is going to be very specific to you. They don't sell a cookie cutter building, a 20 by 30, and with this sidewall, everything about this thing is customized by you, the purchaser. So I can see why that is not online. It's frustrating as a window shopper, right? Like, honestly, just give me a price of one of these things and I can maybe mentally massage it into something else that I'm looking for. So I get it. I can see why that's not there, but it's hard to look at. So what did this thing cost me? So the prep work for the site was probably about $2,500. That included the initial site work done with having the gravel all laid out and staked out, and as well as coming back the second time to do the touch-up after the building had been built. The building itself, so everything but the main garage doors, this includes the man door and the windows and any of the concrete work, so just the building and those couple things, was $65,000 for the building. Again, this is a 48 by 80 foot with a 16-foot sidewall, and that was $65,000. And again, to talk to that, if you wanted to do a 14-foot sidewall, the same footprint, again, that's going to vary all of that. So again, that's why this price is very variable, if that makes any sense. The overhead doors, so my 8-foot by 8-foot door, as well as the 14 by 20-foot door, the main door coming in, the total price on those was $8,850. Obviously, most of that was the main door. And again, these are power doors, so they have this one is a rather large garage door opener on it, as well as the 8-foot by 8-foot door has a garage door opener on it with a clicker and all that stuff. So most of that price, and I don't remember the specifics of what it was, I want to say that main door was at least $6,000 of the $8,800, maybe $65, something like that. Concrete work. So we had 6 inches of concrete poured inside rather than the standard 4. Again, to kind of future-proof this, if somebody comes in with a heavy vehicle or numerous heavy vehicles or heavy equipment, it's not going to damage that. So a 6 inch floor in the 48 by 80 foot building was $19,000. And you could do the math of what we paid per cubic yard for that. The driveway leading up to the outbuilding on the outside was only 4 inches, and that was $10,000. So the grand total for this building is $104,850. That's what we paid to Morton. And then if you add in the site work, that takes it up to a little bit over $107,000. So there you go. That is what this building costs. I hope that helps explain some of this stuff. So there's the overall process from the day that I first looked at a Morton building and contacted them, or the website, to the day that we actually had it erected on our property and usable, as well as having the concrete work and the doors and all that stuff installed afterwards. So I hope this helps somebody. This is a video that I was searching for when I was doing my shopping. What's the process and roughly what's the cost on it? I hope this helps somebody along the way. So obviously my channel is focusing mainly on buses, but I will be sharing information kind of about this building, things that I've done to it or will be doing to it over the upcoming months, years along the way. This is a long-term ownership. I'm not giving this thing up. So I hope that helps. So if you've made it this far in the video, thanks for watching, and hopefully I see you back here. Bye now.